I remember back in 2016 watching Gintama, there was this mad quote Gintoki said. It sort of caught me by surprise because he's had a shit ton of iconic quotes, and they all just really made a lot of sense. But this one was different. This one stood out to me more than the others. Now, as we all know, Gintama is probably renowned for being the anime that can catch you by surprise in amongst all its humor and seamlessly hurl a bomb of emotion at you, giving you all the feels. But that's where it got difficult, because whatever it was I was feeling, I couldn't consciously bring it to the forefront. Feeling something so intensely, but being unable to figure out what it is frustrating at best, and to be honest, a little insulting. As if my inability to process, sit in that discomfort, be in sync with my emotions to figure it out was insulting to my intelligence. Now, unlike shows or movies, when characters go through these little internal conflicts, they eventually come to an answer as the series runs its course. The story has been pre-planned that way to convey a certain message or a desired lesson. But the hardest thing I had accepting was that in reality, I was not guaranteed an answer to this. Like, what if this feeling just lingered around my head forever? And it did for some time. I just couldn't completely let it go. Like, it was always there, but under a layer of fog, and I just couldn't articulate the feeling through it. So I couldn't let it go, but I couldn't figure it out either. So my only option was really to try force myself to drown it out so I could return to my comfort zone. But it wasn't that easy. Feeling a little confused, feeling a little frustrated, wishing I was a bit smarter. Like, what the hell do I do? So just before we begin, I just want everyone to know that I am not a psychologist or any of the following professions listed here. So please don't take this as a substitute for medical or professional advice. Also, I understand that nothing here is really groundbreaking or new. It's just a story told from my own perspective. So thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, so if you're here because of the title, don't worry, this is all related. But how is it that I want to help? What's my emotional confusion got to do with anything? Well, before I get into all that, I'm just going to have to go into a bit of context of how I've made sense of it all, this world. So, the human mind, responsible for all mental phenomena. If you try to describe it, what comes to mind?
Wait, hold on. That's the universe. My bad. But if I do that's the brain.
Alright, yeah, I'll see what he did there. But there's a part of me that agrees with what he's saying in that its complexity is arguably enough to rival galaxies. It's so laid in thoughts and functions. I've heard more attempts to describe it than I can possibly remember. And the funny thing is as oversaturated and piss-takeable as quotes are, none of them are actually wrong. Or when it comes to being objective, you can't shut it down entirely. Unless they're an asshole. But even then, think of the saying, everyone is entitled to their opinion. Everyone. That's a lot of people. And for billions of people who can potentially argue as not being objectively wrong, almost proportionally describes the galaxy of complexity that is the human mind. The foundation of everything created in this world could have only been realized through the brilliance of the mind. Like how people can create art so breathtaking, moving you on levels you question how could it be of this world. To advances in science, engineering, modern medicine, centuries ago, even the most optimistic of people will not have foreseen this. And then to top it all off, this superhuman ability, hardwired to adapt, push further and further past our limits, whether it comes from a strong purpose to improve, achieve our goals, or this desire to do it for someone you love or someone you care about. I believe inherently it's something we all have within us. Now, I don't mean to break your balls, with overused wannabe deep quotes and dialogue. But all jokes aside, I admit these hold a heavy level of truth in regarding how amazing the human mind can be. So, if the mind is capable of all this, how does it turn against us and drag us down to a dark place? Well, to oversimplify it, extraordinarily, mental illness, or ill mental health, mental disorder, mental health condition, whatever you recognize it as, I believe it involves a larger than life-size spectrum of psychological subsets. Subsets you've probably heard of, like stress, depression, anxiety, or trauma, which can be broken down into like further subsets like fear of the unknown, like overthinking, panic or PTSD, like hopelessness, isolation. And then this like common trait I see in so many people who suffer like from mental illness is like just this tendency to like internalize everything and just like suppress whatever it is they're going through, which I can only imagine how much harder it makes things. But like no matter what interchangeable term like we use to describe mental illness, I believe like in a negative proportion, it's almost on the same level of how brilliant like the human mind can be, at least like when it comes like sheer impact. And generally speaking, it's difficult to get a quantitative measure of mental illness. Like unlike a wound, where just by looking at it, you can get an idea of how bad it is. Mental illness is just so much more complex. Like you often hear terms like depression, the silent killer, just because of its hidden nature. And yes, we have things like questionnaires, professional diagnoses, and like MRIs to measure brain activity, but like, that's not so easily accessible to the millions affected by mental illness. Like in some cases, like we can really only gauge it through the impact it has on those involved and just how it manifests like secondarily. And sometimes it's really only acknowledged after it's too late or something tragic has happened. Like before that, it's often questioned or even disregarded. And it's heartbreaking that people's struggles can go unnoticed. Like they'd be facing like this huge like battle internally, and we, the external observer, literally have like no idea. All right, well, not completely disregarded in the exaggerated sense, as I said before, because really, I feel like this generation is making like such good progress towards like the treatment and the understanding of mental health. Like we're moving towards a new era, and it's one I really want to be a part of, because even with all this help readily available, there are still so many people who like don't have a means of reaching out. And like whether that's like because there's something deep inside that stops them, like whether that be fear, judgment, stigma, religion, culture, society, identity, loneliness. Like you want to, but like when you try to open up, try to talk to someone, you just freeze. Something as nuanced and circumstance specific as mental illness, on a scale as widespread as society, like it just makes you wonder the sheer number of events that can have a bearing on someone's mental health that make it so infinitely individualized. Like mental health leaks into so many facets of our lives. I just don't think there could ever be like enough support. Now, this stuff could just be a response to the that's life part we all go through. It doesn't necessarily mean we're mentally ill. Some forms of anxiety and stress are actually important in improving outcomes. But if you could take one thing from this video is to understand that it all depends where it lies on the spectrum, like to what degree it affects our lives. From everyday stress that can be fixed with good sleep, good food, and a bit of exercise, to the more severe end where it becomes chronically, psychologically suffering. Most can agree that once it's hit this point of like serious life interference, there may be something more sinister going on. It's probably wrong for me to use the term conventional when referring to mental health, but And I'm going to be doing this a lot, like just like disclaiming that I know it's completely out of my scope to put a definitive label of what it actually is. But if you could just hear me just for the next part, I feel as if the most conventional understanding of mental health comes down to these three subsets. Just for the sake of this video, like these are the ones I'm going to go over. I do have every intention to go over like more specific and difficult like facets of mental health as well in the future, and even sort of like little mental imperfections that like people deal with like day to day that aren't like super harmful, but like when you're dealing out alone, you don't know what it is. It can be like really frustrating to deal with. Yeah, but for now, I think this is a pretty good place to start. So going into anxiety first, like we all know that feeling, the one of nerves, that inner dread, the anticipation, whether that be from something foreseeable or unforeseeable. And there are many types of anxiety. Like, it can range from the smallest levels, like casual conversation, to more emotionally heavy things like confrontation. And sometimes the mind can just like race ahead by preparing for hypothetical scenarios as a method to try to control the anxiety. But then they start to run rampant and the thoughts, like they start to spiral. Now, this is only one scenario, but that's generally what I've experienced when it comes to anxiety. It's like this cycle. Anxiety is just so infused with fear of the unknown, followed by overthinking to compensate. And I guess in my basic understanding, that's sort of where anxiety starts to cross over into that interference stage, where the fear and overthinking start to win over and the ability to overcome it gets smaller and smaller, to the point where it becomes like too much to resist at all. I've seen some cases, some people just socially like shut themselves off and just try to avoid anything that's potentially anxiety triggering. Now, when you're swarmed with anxiety, but you're able to overcome it, do what you set out to do, I don't think people give themselves enough credit for that. And for whatever reason that may be, like maybe they don't think it's worthy of celebrating, or, maybe there's just some dickhead who's just like all undermining, like, oh, calm down, bro. But, I think it's something people like should be able to draw a good level of self-confidence from. Something to be celebrated, or, if not that, at least reaffirmed. Because anxiety disorders aren't just people making a big deal out of nothing. It contributes to a large portion of mental illness. And this was back in 2017, so way before the world went to shit. So I just feel like there has to be more to it than that. Like, it's not simply just nerves. And then the next one I'm going to go over is depression. Now, these days I feel like that word can be thrown around pretty lightly.
Now I'm depressed. Even more than I was.
But in reality, I think what he means, and generally people who use it in a similar context, just mean that it's a low mood. I'm sure many of us have gone through this temporarily, from whatever reason that may be, but after a day or two, we generally bounce back and are out the door, ready to go again. Now, if we were to turn our attention back onto the spectrum, low mood will probably be the earliest levels of depression, that sadness. But, of course, I understand there's a lot more to it than I've just made out to be. Like, we have to consider a lot of different factors that may contribute. It's not so black and white to suggest that if you're here, then you're depressed, and if you place here, then you're not depressed. According to the World Health Organization International Classification of Disease Manual, it becomes more underlying of depression when specific subsets and elements have interrupted your life for longer than 2 weeks. And that involves, but it's not limited to, sadness, that grief, that emotional pain through loss, a loss of interest and enjoyment in things that used to bring you joy, like constant irritation, being fatigued, exhaustion, poor concentration, sleep disturbance, and then even things like excessive guilt and, of course, withdrawal. these things, they have such a hold over you. Like, it drains you. It's so exhausting, and there's really nothing else you want to do except like crash. Now, whether it be from like the pressures of life, issues from finance, work, school, family, or relationships, stress can stem from many situations. And in low levels, it is quite manageable. But when it gets to that point of interference, where it's more chaotic, it's more continuous, like we feel it manifest in our bodies. Like you can't sleep, like you get like that clenched jaw, you get that shoulder tension, you get writhing headaches, like you rip your hair out, you rip your face off. It's extremely frustrating and you can feel so powerless. You have all these competing priorities in your head. You can't think with any clarity, so you're just paralyzed. And then that leads to the absolute bane of all our existence. That's procrastination. In what I've dubbed as the quadruple P's of stress. So, like without productive action, you begin to panic because it's too late to do anything, or it's too late to do anything before like serious consequences occur. And to me, like that culminates as like the ultimate doom. That is like severe stress. When it comes to mental illness, you often hear the terms like stress and anxiety or anxiety and depression, as if it's like some cruel like 2-for-1. But what that tells me is that even in our most simple understanding of what mental illness is, it's still very layered and there's still like a lot of dimensions to it. But if I may just use like a house fire analogy to compare. So let's say we have a house fire. At some point, smoke will definitely follow. So in this case, let's say the stress is symbolized by the fire. There's a likely domino effect where one will lead to the other. So for example, say you lose your job and the reality of being unable to support yourself or your family becomes very stressful. You get anxious, have a myriad of thoughts, that whole overthinking to overcompensate as a coping mechanism starts a cycle over and over in your head. And then over extended periods of time, that really starts to take its toll. Quality of life starts to go down and potentially all the signs and symptoms of depression I highlighted before could set in. So in this case, depression and anxiety could be the resultant smoke from the fire that started it all, which was the stress of losing the job. There's no smoke without fire, but in anyone's experience of mental illness, any one of these three could have been the fire that started it all. Sort of like a chicken or an egg kind of situation. Trying to think about it systematically or dogmatically can be like really difficult, even at the best of times. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to leave all that technical diagnosis stuff out of this. There are far better people out there to deal with that. But what I'm trying to say is that I understand, or I'll keep trying to understand that everybody's like experiences vary, and I don't want to label some as more severe or less important than what they actually are. I'm not here to establish some sort of like mental health pecking order. So please don't think you're mentally ill like just because at various stages in your life you've been able to like relate to some of the things I've covered in this video. Like it's just so circumstance specific mental illness. Like it's so much more intricate than what I've just made it out to be. Like for example, there were times where I was going through like extreme lows and I was just thinking like really tired at the end of the day, just thinking like, is it going to be like this way forever? Like, fuck, like, am I ever going to get out of this? And then the next day after like a good sleep and just gaining a bit of perspective, like I was in a completely different headspace and I was like, all positive. I was like, what was I even worried about, Intense emotions, like the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, it's very easy to get swept up in them and for them to sort of control our mindset. Especially these days, since we have so many things like capable of burning us out leaving us like just too tired to like regulate those emotions, so they can just like spiral downwards. But even if you have been diagnosed with a mental illness and you feel like it does control your life, like I don't know how to say this without sounding like naive or like ignorant, and especially since like I could never understand what the other person's going through. But I worked with a lot of people like going through or experiencing mental illness, and they would just be telling me like how worthless they felt. And there was always this like bursting urge like in me that just really wanted to tell them that like, you're not a lesser person because of what you're going through, you know? Like, yeah, you fucking, like, you're not. Like, you deserve to have a future to look forward to, and you deserve to have people who love you as well, just like everybody else. But, like, that obviously doesn't take the pain away, and it doesn't change the fact that they're still going to be in the situation that they're in. But, like, maybe it can provide a sense of relief, and that's how I want to help. Because talking out is generally a good place to start. So let's say there's something weighing heavily on your mind. Like, you have an idea of what it is, but when you try to articulate it, you hear it as you're talking, and it doesn't match up with whatever the picture of it is in your head. So you just sort of like stop and backtrack with comments like, oh, actually, don't worry about it. Or like, I just can't explain. Or I don't know what I'm saying. Like similar things like that, you know the rest. It's like you're sussing out the other person's reaction. Maybe it's not going how you'd like it to. So you begin to withdraw back into your shell, as if to say, maybe I shouldn't have approached this person to talk about it. This anxiety-riddled situation, making it difficult to communicate how much of the toll it actually takes, like whether that's big or small, making it all that more frustrating. Like, if that's what you experienced when trying to talk to someone about it, like, that's how I want to help. Like, instead of judging or an over-eagerness to cut you off and drop meaningless, self-righteous knowledge, like, even if it is well-intentioned, it's still, I feel, sometimes like unnecessary. I just want to provide this openness where all those communication difficulties are understood and give you all the time you need, like free of like that rushing anxiety to get it out. Because how am I supposed to understand like the galaxy level mindset of each unique individual? Like that's the thing, like I can't. But the least I can do is try to create like this openness, like this community. I don't know how I'm going to do it exactly. It's not like I can create this like wide open board of discussion where all this can be talked about on like a large scale. Or like I can do like one-on-one, like talk it out sessions over YouTube. And like also I should be aware of like the dangers of reaching out to a stranger over the internet, especially something as private as a mental health. So like common sense should definitely apply there. You know, maybe like remaining anonymous or just things like that. Probably the best way to go. Yeah, but you better believe that I'll definitely find a way, you know. I'll figure something out. Like I'll do whatever it takes because this is a topic that really means a lot to me, and I really hope that this message I'm trying to send like will eventually be able to help other people. Yeah. But yeah, this is my first video. I realized how crap I am at editing things out. You know, I definitely not at the stage as some others, but hopefully from this point on, like my videos won't be this long, and like the introductory video would be no longer than like a 3 or a 4-part video. Like I had intended to release this back in like December last year, but it's taken up more time than I'd imagined or wanted. Sorry, but yeah, I'm figuring it out now as I go. Yeah, anyway, that's about it. Really long video. But yeah, if you're still watching or you skip to the end, really appreciate like you watching all the way to the end, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And yeah, like I said, hopefully it won't be this long again. All right, thank you.